At long last, this is our final time for this month reading another set of books. We have read so many goddamn books, but there are so many goddamn books more to read. Once we finish after this video, our next one, I think we're back on the road. I'll have to actually go back and check my other videos to remember where we left off, but I'm pretty sure we're either back on the road or maybe we're doing a quest. I don't really know. I might just go on the road anyway. We'll see. But yeah, this is it's the last video of the month, so it is our last time reading here, at least for the time being. And what to read is the question of the day. I feel like I would say that I should start a new series, but let's hold off. Actually, I have a series that we can read. I do have a series, just 2-volume series. Volumes 1 and Volumes 2, 18 pages and 18 pages. Do I want to read just those 2 books, though? I feel like I need a third. Do I have another book that I can start off with, The Old Ways? Yeah, we can start off with The Old Ways. Why not? Let's make sure it's actually on my list, though. It is. All right, let's start off with The Old Ways, and then we'll read The Black Arrow. The Old Ways by Celeris the Lore Master. We who know the old ways are well aware of the existence of a spiritual world invisible to the unenlightened, just as one living in a kingdom but unaware of the political machinations underneath may see a new tax or battle preparation as the caprices of fortune. Many observe floods, famines, and madness with helpless incomprehension. This is deplorable, as the great Sulian Darnazihan moaned, the power of ignorance can shatter ebony like glass. Glass armor is very strong, must say. What, after all, is the origin of these spiritual forces that move the invisible strings of Mundus? Any neophyte of Artaeum knows that these spirits are our ancestors, and that, while living, they too were bewildered by the spirits of their ancestors, and so on back to the original Arcariae? The Daedran gods to whom the common people turn are no more than the spirits of superior men and women whose power and passion granted them great influence in the afterworld. Certainly this is our truth in our religion, but how does it help us in our sacred duty of what the fuck is that word? Celifrenance, or providing grave and faithful counsel to lesser men. Primarily, it is easy to grasp the necessity both of endowing good men with great power and making powerful men good. We recognize the multiple threats that a strong tyrant represents, breeds cruelty which feeds the Daedra Boethia, and hatred which feeds the Daedra Vermina. Excuse me. If he should die having performed a particularly malevolent act, he may go to rule in Oblivion, and worst of all, he inspires other villains to thirst after power and other rulers to embrace villainy. Knowing this, we have developed patience in our dealings with such despots. They should be crippled, humiliated, impoverished, imprisoned. Other counselors may advocate assassination or warfare, which, aside from its spiritual insignificance, is expensive and likely to inflict at least as much pain on the innocent as the brutish dictator. No, we are intelligence gatherers, dignified diplomats, not revolutionaries. How, then, are our counselors faithful? We are faithful only to the old ways. It is essential always to remember the spiritual world while keeping our eyes open in the physical one. Performing the rites of Moeda on the 2nd of Hearthfire and the Vigeld on the 1st of Second Seed are essential means of empowering salutary spirits and debilitating unclean ones. How, then, are we at once faithful to those we counsel, and to the Isle of Artaeum? Perhaps the sage Taheritai said it best. In Mundus, conflict and disparity are what bring change, and change is the most sacred of the elven forces. Change is the force without focus or origin. It is the duty of the disciplined Psijic Enlightened One to dilute change where it brings greed, gluttony, sloth, ignorance, prejudice, cruelty. Here, to Heretai lists the rest of the 111 prodigalities, and to encourage change where it brings excellence, beauty, happiness, and enlightenment. As such, the faithful counsel has but one master, his mind. If the man the Psijic counsels acts wickedly and brings bad change and will otherwise not be counseled, it is the Psijic's duty, by counterbalance, the bad change by any means necessary. Emphasis mine. A student of the old ways may indeed ally himself to a lord, but it is a risky relationship. It cannot be stressed enough that the choice be wisely made. Should the lord refuse wise counsel and order the Psijic to use Teheritai's outmoded word, to perform an act contrary to the teachings of the old ways, there are few available options. The Psijic may obey, albeit unwillingly, and fall prey to the dark forces against which he has devoted his life. The Psijic may abandon his lord, which will bring shame on him in the Isle of Artaeum, and so may never be allowed home again, or the Psijic may simply kill himself. Nice. The end. What a happy ending there. Well, that was the old ways, and now we move on to the Black Arrow. The Black Arrow, Part 1, by Gorgic Gwyn. I was young when the Duchess of Woda hired me as an assistant footman at her summer palace. My experience with the ways of the titled aristocracy was very limited before that day. There were wealthy merchants, traders, diplomats, and officials who had large operations in Eldenroot and ostentatious palaces for entertaining, but my relatives were all far from those social circles. There was no family business for me to enter when I reached adulthood, but my cousin heard that an estate far from the city required servants. It was so remotely located that there were unlikely to be many applicants for the position. I walked for 5 days into the jungles of Valenwood before I met a group of riders going my direction. They were 3 Bosmer men, 1 Bosmer woman, 2 Breton women, and a Dunmer man, adventurers from the look of them. "Are you also going to Maliva?" asked Prolissa, one of the Breton women, after we made our introductions. "I don't know what that is," I replied. "I'm seeking a domestic position with the Duchess of Woda." "We'll take you to her gate," said the Dunmer Missoon Akin, pulling me up to his horse. "But you would be wise not to tell her grace that students from Maliva escorted you. Not unless you don't really want the position in her service." Akin explained himself as we rode on. Maliva was the closest village to the Duchess's estate, where a great and renowned archer had retired after a long life of military service. His name was Hiomast, and though he was retired, he had begun to accept students who wished to learn the art of the bow. In time, when word spread of the great teacher, more and more students arrived to learn from the master. The Breton women had come down all the way from the western reach of High Rock. Akin himself had journeyed across the continent from his home near the great volcano in Morrowind. He showed me the ebony arrows he had brought from his homeland. I had never seen anything so black. "From what we've heard," said Copail, one of the Bosmer men, "the Duchess is an Imperial whose family has been here even before the Empire was formed, so you might think that she was accustomed to the common people of Valenwood. Nothing could be further from the truth. She despises the village, and the school most of all. I suppose she wants to control all the traffic in her jungle," laughed Prolissa. I accepted the information with gratitude, and found myself dreading more and more my first meeting with the intolerant Duchess. My first sight of the palace through the trees did nothing to assuage my fears. It was nothing like any building I had ever seen in Valenwood, a vast edifice of stone and iron, with a jagged row of battlements like the jaws of a great beast. Most of the trees near the palace had been hewn away long ago. I could only imagine the scandal that must have caused, and what fear the Bosmer peasants must have had of the Duchy of Woda to have allowed it. In their stead was a wide gray-green moat circling in a ring around the palace, so it seemed to be on a perfect, if artificial, island. I had seen such sights in tapestries from High Rock in the Imperial Province, but never in my homeland. "There will be a guard at the gate, so we'll leave you here," said Akin, stopping his horse in the road. "It'd be best for you if we weren't damned by association with us." I thanked my companions and wished them good luck with their schooling. They rode on and I followed on foot. In a few minutes' time, I was at the front gate, which I noticed was linked to tall and ornate railings to keep the compound secure. When the gatekeeper understood that I was there to inquire about a domestic position, he allowed me past and signaled to another guard across the open lawn to extend the drawbridge and allow me to cross the moat. There was one last security feature, the front door. An iron monstrosity with the Woda coat of arms across the top, reinforced by more strips of iron, and a single golden keyhole. The man standing guard unlocked the door and gave me passage into the huge, gloomy gray stone palace. Her grace greeted me in her drawing. She was thin and wrinkled like a reptile, cloaked in a simple red gown. It was obvious that she never smiled. Our interview consisted of a single question. "Do you know anything about being a junior footman in the employment of an imperial noblewoman?" Her voice was like ancient leather. "No, your grace?" "Good. No servant never understands what needs to be done, and I particularly dislike those who think they do. You're engaged." Life at the palace was joyless, but the position of junior footman was very undemanding. I had nothing to do on most days except to stay out of the Duchess's sight. At such times, I usually walked 2 miles down the road to Maliva. In some ways, there was nothing special or unusual about the village. There are thousands of identical places in Valenwood, but on the hillside nearby was Master Hyomast's archery academy, and I would often take my luncheon and watch the practice. Prolissa and Akin would sometimes meet me afterwards. With Akin, the subjects of conversation were very seldom strayed far from archery, though I was very fond of him. I found Prolissa a more enchanting companion, not only because she was pretty for a Breton, but also because she seemed to have interests outside of the realm of marksmanship. "There's a circus in High Rock I saw when I was a little girl called the Quill Circus," she said during one of our walks through the woods. "They've been around for as long as anyone can remember. You have to see them if you ever can. They have plays and sideshows, and the most amazing acrobats and archers you've ever seen. That's my dream, to join them some day when I'm good enough." "How will you know when you're a good enough archer?" I asked. She didn't answer, and when I turned, I realized that she had disappeared. I looked around, bewildered, until I heard laughter from the tree above me. She was perched on a branch, grinning. "I may not join as an archer. Maybe I'll join as an acrobat," she said. "Or maybe as both. I figured that Valenwood would be the place to go to see what I could learn. You've got all those great teachers to imitate in the trees here. Those ape men." She coiled up, bracing her left leg before springing forward on her right. In a second, she had leapt across to a neighboring branch. I found it difficult to keep talking to her. "The Imga, you mean?" I stammered. "Aren't you nervous up at that height?" "It's a cliché, I know," she said, jumping to an even higher branch, "but the secret is not to ever look down." Would you mind coming down?" "I probably should anyhow," she said. She was a good 30 feet up now, balancing herself, arms outstretched on a very narrow branch. She gestured toward the gates just barely visible on the other side of the road. "This tree is actually as close as I want to get to your Duchess's place." I held back a gasp as she dove off the branch, somersaulting until she landed on the ground, knees slightly bent. That was the trick, she explained, anticipating the blow before it happened. I expressed to her my confidence that she would be a great attraction at the Quill Circus. Of course, I know now that never was to be. On that day, as I recall, I had to return early. It was one of the rare occasions when I had work of a sort to do. Whenever the Duchess had guests, I was to be at the palace. That is not to say that I had any particular duties, except to be seen standing at attention in the dining room. The stewards and maids worked hard to bring in the food and clear the plates afterwards, but the footmen were purely decorative, a formality. But at least I was an audience for the drama to come. The Black Arrow, Part 2, by the same guy. On the last dinner in my employ at the palace, the Duchess, quite surprisingly, had invited the mayor of Maliva and Master Hyomast himself among her other guests. The servants' gossip was manic. The mayor had been there before, albeit very irregularly, but Hyomast's presence was unthinkable. What could she mean by such a conciliatory gesture? The dinner itself progressed along with perfect, if slightly cool, civility among all parties. Hyameist and the Duchess were both very quiet. The mayor tried to engage the group in a discussion of the Emperor Pelagius IV's new son and heir Uriel, but it failed to spark much interest. Lady Villia, elderly but much more vivacious than her sister the Duchess, led most of the talk about crime and scandal in Eldenroot. I have been encouraging her to move out to the country, away from all that unpleasantness for years now, the Duchess said, meeting the eyes of the mayor. We've been discussing more recently the possibility of her building a palace on Moliva Hill, but there's so little space there, as you know. Fortunately, we've come to a discovery. There is a wide field just a few days west on the edge of the river, ideally suited. It sounds perfect, the mayor smiled and turned to Lady Villia. When will your ladyship begin building? The very day you move your village to the site, replied the Duchess of Woda. The mayor turned to her to see if she was joking. She obviously was not. Think of how much more commerce you could bring to your village if you were close to the river, said Lady Villia jovially, and Master Hyomeist's students could have easier access to his fine school. Everyone would benefit. I know it would put my sister's heart to ease if there was less trespassing and poaching on her lands. There is no poaching or trespassing on your lands now, your grace, frowned Hyomeist. You do not own the jungle, nor will you. The villagers may be persuaded to leave, that I don't know, but my school will stay here, where it is. The dinner party never really recovered happily. Hyomeist and the mayor excused themselves, and my services, such as they were not needed in the drawing room where the group went to have their drinks. There was no laughter to be heard through the walls that evening. The next day, even though there was a dinner planned for the evening, I left on my usual walk to Moliva. Before I had even reached the drawbridge, the guard held me back. Where are you going, Gorgic? Not to the village, are you? Why not? He pointed to the plume of smoke in the distance. A fire broke out very early this morning, and it's still going. Apparently it started at Master Hyomeist's school. It looks like the work of some traveling brigands. Blessed Stendar, I cried. Are the students alive? No one knows, but it'd be a miracle if anyone survived. It was late, and most everyone was sleeping. I know they've already found the master's body, or what was left of it, and they also found that girl, your friend, Prolissa. No! I spent the day in a state of shock. It seemed inconceivable what my instinct told me, that the two noble old ladies, Lady Villia and the Duchess of Woda, had arranged for a village and school that irritated them to be reduced to ashes. At dinner, they mentioned the fire in Moliva only very briefly, as if it were not news at all. But I did see the Duchess smile for the first time ever. It was a smile I will never forget until the day I die. The next morning, I had resolved to go to the village and see if I could be of any assistance to the survivors. I was passing through the servants' hall to the grand foyer when I heard the sound of a group of people ahead. The guards and most of the servants were there, pointing at the portrait of the Duchess that hung in the center of the wall. There was a single black bolt of ebony piercing the painting, right at the Duchess's heart. I recognized it at once. It was one of Misun Akin's arrows I had seen in his quiver, forged, he said, in the bowels of Dagoth himself. My first reaction was relief. The Dunmer who had been kind enough to give me a ride to the palace had survived the fire. My second reaction was echoed by a presence in the hall. How had the vandal gotten past the guards, the gate, the moat, and the massive iron door? The Duchess, arriving shortly after I, was clearly furious, though she was too well bred to show it, but by raising her web-thin eyebrows, she wasted no time in assigning all her servants to new duties to keep the palace grounds guarded at all times. We were given regular shifts and precise, narrow patrols. The next morning, despite all precautions, there was another black arrow piercing the Duchess's portrait. So it continued for a week's time. The Duchess saw to it that at least one person was always present in the foyer, but somehow the arrow always found its way to her painting whenever the guards' eyes were momentarily averted. A complex series of signals were devised, so each patrol could report back any sounds or disturbances they encountered during their vigil. At first, the Duchess arranged them so her castellan would receive record of any disturbances during the day, and the chief of the guard during the night, but when she found that she could not sleep, she made certain that the information came to her directly. The atmosphere in the palace had shifted from gloomy to nightmarish. A snake would slither across the moat, and suddenly her grace would be tearing through the east wing to investigate. A strong gust of wind ruffling the leaves on one of the few trees in the lawn was a similar emergency. An unfortunate lone traveler on the road in front of the palace, a completely innocent man, as it turned out, brought such a violent reaction that he must have thought that he had stumbled on a war. In a way, he had. And every morning there was a new arrow in the front hall, mocking her. I was given the terrible assignment of guarding the portrait for a few hours in the early morning. Not wanting to be the one to discover the arrow, I seated myself in a chair opposite, never letting my eyes move away for even a second. I don't know if you've had the experience of watching one object relentlessly, but it has a strange effect. All other senses vanish. That was why I was particularly startled when the Duchess rushed into the room, blurring the gulf for me between her portrait and herself. There's something moving behind the tree across the road from the gates, she roared, pushing me aside and fumbling with her key in the gold lock. She was shaking with madness and excitement, and the key did not seem to want to go in. I reached out to help her, but the Duchess was already kneeling, her eye to the keyhole, to be certain that the key went through. It was precisely in that second that the arrow arrived, but this one never made it as far as the portrait. I actually met Miss Simmakin years later while I was in Morrowind to entertain some nobles. He was impressed that I had risen from being a humble domestic servant to being a bard of some renown. He himself had returned to the Ashlands, and, like his old master Hyalmaest, was retired to the simple life of teaching and hunting. I told him that I had heard that Lady Villia had decided not to leave the city, and that the village of Modiva had been rebuilt. He was happy to hear that, but I could not find a way to ask him what I really wanted to know. I felt like a fool just wondering if what I thought were true, that he had been behind Prolissa's tree across the road from the gate every morning that summer, firing an arrow through the gate, across the lawn, across the moats, through a keyhole, and into a portrait of the Duchess of Woda until he struck the Duchess herself. It was clearly an impossibility. I chose not to ask. As we left one another that day, and he was waving goodbye, he said, "I am pleased to see you doing so well, my friend. I am happy you moved that chair." Huh. Finally got the opportunity to actually kill that lady. What a fucking shot. That's goddamn impressive. Well, that's long last we get to see the light of day as we leave Sickly Burnus's tap house and exit into, it's probably the middle of night. Just you watch, it's the middle of fucking night right now, isn't it? No, it's the middle of the day. But it is Crucible, so it always just feels depressing as shit. No, it's the afternoon at least. Yeah, well, holy shit, it feels weird to be able to run around. Oh my god. It has been a full fucking month of us reading books, and well, we still got so many more books that we need to read, but
must return to duty.
What's happening? Is that the fighting people up there again? I thought I just heard a fight. Am I wrong? Thought I heard a fight. I guess I didn't. Odd. Quite odd indeed. Anyway, yeah. We still got a lot more reading to do, but we have at least knocked out a lot of the reading that we had to do, so that's always good. But yeah, so that's going to do it for today, so thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. When next we return, I think we'll be doing some more exploration. And then, we'll go back to our normal routine of, swapping back and forth between reading and, either exploring or doing a quest or whatnot. But, yeah, till the next episode, goodbye. Y'all bursting it.
Cause I don't wanna see the glow without you. Refuse to even leave my home without you. Or my brain's gonna explode without you. I don't even know how to cope without you. Cause I don't wanna see the glow without you. Refuse to even leave my home without you. Or my brain's gonna explode without you. I don't even know how to cope without you.